Freezing. Bear. Begs for help for her cubs. What this family did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The snowstorm had been relentless for 3 days straight, transforming the mountainside into a treacherous landscape of white. Inside their remote cabin, the Morgan family huddled around the crackling fireplace, grateful for its warmth. Mason Morgan peered through the frost-covered window, watching as another foot of snow blanketed their surroundings. His wife, Emma, wrapped a quilt tighter around their children, 10-year-old Willow and 7-year-old Noah, who were entranced by the dancing flames. "Do you think the generator will hold?" Emma whispered, her breath visible even inside the cabin. The temperature had plummeted well below freezing, and they were miles from their nearest neighbor. Mason nodded, though uncertainty flickered across his face. "It should. We have enough fuel to last another week if we're careful." He didn't mention his growing concern about their dwindling food supplies. The storm had arrived earlier than forecasted, catching them unprepared during what was supposed to be a short winter retreat at their family cabin. Willow pressed her nose against the cold glass, her eyes widening suddenly. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something moving out there." Mason joined his daughter at the window, squinting into the gathering darkness. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow and the shadowy outlines of pine trees bowing under the weight of ice. Then, a large dark shape emerged from between the trees, moving slowly toward the cabin. "Get back," Mason instructed, pulling Willow away from the window. His heart pounded as the shape drew closer, revealing itself in the dim glow cast from their windows. A massive brown bear, its fur crusted with ice and snow, lumbered through the deep drifts. The animal's movements were sluggish, desperate. Behind her, and Mason could now see it was indeed a female, 2 smaller shapes struggled to follow in her tracks. "Cubs," Emma breathed, joining them at the window. "She has cubs with her." The mother bear stopped about 20 feet from the cabin porch, swaying slightly. Even from inside, they could see her ribs protruding beneath her matted fur. The cubs, barely visible in the snow, huddled against their mother's legs, shivering violently. "Something's wrong," Noah said, his small face pinched with worry. "Bears should be hibernating now, right?" Mason nodded, unable to tear his eyes from the scene. "They should be. She must have been disturbed somehow, or—" The bear suddenly raised her head and looked directly at the cabin window, directly at them. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to hold an impossible emotion. Desperation. "She knows we're here," Emma whispered. As if responding to Emma's words, the bear took another step forward, then another, until she reached the first step of their porch. The cubs whimpered, one of them collapsing into the snow. Without warning, the mother bear rose onto her hind legs, towering against the night sky. The family gasped, stepping back instinctively. But instead of charging, the bear remained upright, swaying slightly, her front paws hanging limply at her sides. "She's begging," Willow said quietly, her voice filled with awe. "Dad, I think she's asking for help." Mason shook his head. "That's impossible. Wild animals don't." The bear dropped back to all fours and nudged one of her cubs, which lay motionless in the snow. The second cub tried to stand but collapsed beside its sibling. The mother made a sound, not a growl or a roar, but a low, keening moan that cut through the howling wind and penetrated the cabin walls. "We have to help them," Willow declared, already reaching for her coat. Mason caught his daughter's arm. "Willow, no. That's a wild bear. No matter how desperate she looks, she's dangerous." "But Dad," Noah chimed in, tears welling in his eyes, "the babies are dying." Emma placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "What if it were Willow and Noah out there?" she asked softly. Mason ran a hand through his hair, torn between protecting his family and responding to the clear distress of the creatures outside their door. As a wildlife photographer, he'd spent years documenting animals in their natural habitats, always maintaining a respectful distance, never interfering. Nature had its own way, its own rules, but this felt different. The bear hadn't wandered near their cabin by chance. She had sought them out, deliberately. "If we do nothing, those cubs won't survive the night," Emma said. "You know that." The bear moaned again, a sound so filled with anguish that it made the hairs on Mason's arms stand up. Then, in a gesture that would haunt him for years to come, she gently pushed one of her cubs a few inches toward the cabin with her nose. In that moment, the boundary between human and animal seemed to dissolve. This wasn't just a bear acting on instinct. This was a mother, desperate to save her children, doing the unthinkable, turning to humans for help. "Get the emergency medical kit," Mason said finally, his decision made, "and all the blankets we can spare." Emma's eyes widened. "What are you going to do?" Mason pulled on his heavy winter coat and gloves. "Something incredibly stupid," he answered. "Or incredibly brave, I'm not sure which yet." As he moved toward the door, he had no way of knowing that what would unfold over the next few hours would not only test the limits of human compassion, but would forge a bond between two species that defied the natural order. A bond that would spread far beyond their isolated cabin and touch the hearts of millions. The storm raged on, but within its fury an extraordinary encounter was about to begin, one that would challenge everything Mason thought he knew about the wild and the creatures that called it home. Outside, the bear watched the cabin door, waiting, hoping against hope that her desperate gamble would pay off, that these humans would help where nature could not. And inside, the Morgan family prepared to attempt the impossible, to save a freezing bear and her cubs from the merciless clutches of winter. Mason's hands trembled as he grabbed the emergency medical kit, the one he had packed for human emergencies, not for treating wild animals. Emma rummaged through their supplies, gathering blankets, towels, and anything else that might provide warmth. Willow and Noah watched with wide, fearful eyes, but also with something else, a spark of wonder that only children could maintain in the face of danger. "Stay inside," Mason instructed firmly as he zipped up his heavy-duty parka. "Lock the door behind me if something goes wrong." He paused, not wanting to frighten the children. Emma grasped his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Nothing will go wrong," she said, with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. As a veterinary assistant, she had some knowledge that might help, but treating wild bears wasn't part of her training. "I'm coming with you." Mason started to protest, but the determination in his wife's eyes silenced him. She had always been the braver one. "Willow, Noah, you two stay by the window," Emma said, pulling on her own winter gear. "Watch us, but do not, under any circumstances, open this door unless we tell you to, understand?" Both children nodded solemnly. Mason took a deep breath, then slowly opened the cabin door. The blast of frigid air that greeted them nearly knocked him back a step. The temperature had dropped even further, and the snowfall had intensified, creating a white wall that was difficult to see through. But there, just visible on their porch steps, the mother bear waited, her massive form eerily still. "She hasn't moved," Mason whispered, almost afraid to shatter the strange tableau before them. Emma grabbed a powerful flashlight from the hook by the door, switching it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the bear and her cubs. What they saw made Emma gasp. One cub lay completely motionless, barely visible beneath a growing layer of snow. The other struggled weakly, pressing against its mother's legs. The mother bear herself was in worse condition than they had initially realized. Blood matted the fur on her right flank. A wound of some kind, partially frozen and crusted with ice. "She's injured," Emma said, her professional instincts kicking in despite her fear. "And those cubs are suffering from hypothermia." As the light hit the bear's face, she blinked but didn't growl or show aggression. Instead, she made that same mournful sound they had heard earlier, then gently nudged the motionless cub again. Mason and Emma exchanged a look. There was no turning back now. "Let's start with the cubs," Emma suggested. "They're smaller, more vulnerable to the cold." Slowly, painfully slowly, they descended the porch steps. The snow reached halfway up their calves, making each step laborious. Mason kept his eyes fixed on the mother bear, watching for any sign of aggression, while Emma focused on the cubs. They stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to help, but, Mason hoped, far enough to retreat if needed. "We need to get them warm," Emma said, "but I don't know if she'll let us touch them." As if understanding their hesitation, the mother bear took a single, heavy step backward. She lowered her head, her eyes never leaving Mason's. I think she's giving us permission," Mason said, hardly believing the words as they left his mouth. Cautiously, Emma extended the blanket she'd brought, approaching the nearest cub. The baby animal was alarmingly cold to the touch as she wrapped the blanket around its tiny body. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, too young to survive a harsh winter outside a den. The mother bear watched, muscles tensed but making no move to stop Emma's ministrations. When Emma reached for the second cub, the one that hadn't been moving, the mother bear made a soft chuffing sound. "This one's in bad shape," Emma murmured, cradling the tiny body. Unlike its sibling, this cub wasn't shivering, a dangerous sign. "We need to get them inside." Mason froze. "Inside?" "Emma, we can't bring bears into our cabin. We don't have a choice," Emma replied, already standing with the unresponsive cub in her arms. "They'll die out here." As Emma turned toward the cabin, the mother bear let out a distressed grunt and took a step forward. Mason's heart leapt into his throat, but the bear wasn't charging. She was following, unwilling to let her cubs out of her sight. "Mason," Emma said quietly, "I think she needs to come too." "That's impossible," Mason hissed, though he knew Emma was right. They couldn't separate the mother from her babies. But a full-grown brown bear in their cabin? With their children inside? The idea was madness. Willow and Noah's faces were pressed against the window, their expressions a mixture of terror and amazement. Mason could almost hear Willow's voice in his head. "Dad, you have to help them all." Emma was already halfway to the porch, the unmoving cub clutched to her chest. The second cub, wrapped in a blanket, struggled weakly in Mason's arms, and behind them, the mother bear followed, her massive paws leaving deep impressions in the snow. "Noah, Willow," Mason called out, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Go into the back bedroom and close the door. Now!" He saw the children's faces disappear from the window and hoped they were following his instructions. As they reached the porch, Emma balanced the cub in one arm while opening the door with the other. She stepped inside, and Mason followed with the second cub. The mother bear reached the bottom of the porch steps, then stopped, as if suddenly uncertain. She swayed on her feet, and Mason noticed fresh blood seeping from her wound, staining the snow beneath her. "Come on," Mason found himself saying, gesturing to the bear. "It's warmer inside." For a long, tense moment, the bear remained where she was, her dark eyes reflecting the light from inside the cabin. Then, with agonizing slowness, she climbed the steps one by one. The porch boards creaked under her weight as she approached the open door. She stopped at the threshold, her massive head nearly touching Mason's chest. He could feel her hot breath, smell the wild musk of her fur. One swipe of those claws could tear him open. One bite from those powerful jaws could end his life. Instead, the bear looked past him to where Emma was already laying the cubs near the fireplace. Then, with a gentleness that defied her size, the mother bear squeezed through the cabin doorway and into the human dwelling. Mason closed the door behind her, locking out the storm but locking them in with a creature that could kill them all without effort. As he turned around, he saw the bear settling herself beside her cubs, her body forming a protective semicircle around them. "Dad?" Willow's voice came from the hallway. She and Noah stood there, clearly having disobeyed his order to stay in the bedroom. Is the bear really in our house?" Before Mason could answer, a loud crack split the air, followed by the cabin plunging into darkness. The generator had failed. In the sudden blackness, all Mason could see were the bear's eyes, reflecting the dying embers of the fireplace. Watching, waiting, unreadable. The storm had just gotten considerably more dangerous. Emma moved with surprising calm in the darkness, her veterinary training taking precedence over her fear. The flashlight she'd brought outside now provided their only illumination as she carefully examined the unresponsive cub by the fireplace. "Mason, stoke the fire," she instructed. "We need to keep it going now more than ever. And get those emergency candles from the kitchen." Mason hesitated, unwilling to take his eyes off the mother bear, who remained unnervingly still in the shadows. "Now, Mason," Emma urged. "This cub is barely holding on." Forcing himself to move, Mason edged around the room, giving the bear a wide berth as he added logs to the fireplace. The flames sputtered, then grew, casting a warm orange glow throughout the main room of the cabin. In their flickering light, he could see the full reality of their situation. The mother bear, enormous and wild, lay on their living room floor. Her brown fur was matted with blood and ice, her breath coming in labored pants. The two cubs, looking impossibly small next to her bulk, were barely moving. One didn't appear to be breathing at all. "We need warm, not hot, water," Emma said, her hands moving expertly over the smaller cub's body. "Willow, Noah, come here slowly. I need your help." The children crept forward, their eyes huge in the firelight. "That's a real bear," Noah whispered, as if saying it aloud might somehow make the surreal scene disappear. "3 bears," Willow corrected, her voice steadier than Mason would have expected. "Like in the story, but backward. We're the ones who let them in. Noah, get the pot of water from the stove. Carefully, it's still warm from earlier," Emma instructed. "Willow, bring me those hand towels from the bathroom." As the children moved to follow her instructions, the mother bear lifted her head, tracking their movements with alert eyes. Mason tensed, ready to throw himself between the bear and his children if necessary, but the animal made no threatening moves. "It's okay," Emma said softly, though whether she was reassuring Mason or the bear wasn't clear. "She knows we're trying to help." "How can you be sure?" Mason asked, retrieving the emergency candles and lighting them, placing them strategically around the room. Emma didn't answer immediately. She was focused on the unresponsive cub, gently rubbing its tiny body with a towel. "They were driven out of hibernation," she said finally. "Something must have forced them from their den. The wound on her side might be a clue. They've been wandering in this storm looking for shelter. That's why they came here." But how did she know to come to us? Mason persisted. How did she know we would help? She didn't, Emma replied, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. This was desperation, not calculation. She had nowhere else to go, no other options left. Noah returned with the pot of water, walking with exaggerated care to avoid spilling. Willow followed with an armful of towels. The mother bear watched them approach, then, to everyone's surprise, shifted slightly to give them better access to the cubs. "See?" Willow whispered. "She trusts us." "Or she's too weak to fight," Mason countered, but even he was beginning to wonder. The bear's behavior defied everything he thought he knew about wild animals. Under Emma's guidance, they soaked towels in the warm water and wrapped them around the cubs. The more alert cub squirmed weakly, making soft whimpering sounds. The other remained frighteningly still. "This one's heartbeat is very slow," Emma murmured, her fingers pressed against the unresponsive cub's chest. "But it's there. We might still have a chance." Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury, rattling the windows and sending gusts of wind down the chimney that made the fire dance wildly. The generator had failed completely, leaving them without electricity or heat beyond what the fireplace provided. "What about her?" Willow asked, nodding toward the mother bear. "She's hurt too." Emma glanced at the wound on the bear's flank. "It looks like a bullet wound," she said grimly. "Someone shot her." "Poachers?" Mason suggested, his photographer's mind already documenting this extraordinary encounter despite the danger. "Or a frightened hunter," Emma replied. "The bullet's still in there. I can see the entry wound, but no exit." The mother bear's eyes seemed to register their conversation. She shifted position, exposing her injured side more fully, as if inviting their attention. "Dad," Willow said suddenly, "your satellite phone. We should call for help." Mason had almost forgotten about the phone, their emergency link to the outside world when the regular phones were down. But as he moved toward his equipment bag, a new sound stopped him in his tracks. Scratching. Coming from outside. On the porch. The mother bear's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in her chest for the first time since they'd brought her inside. Her ears flattened against her head, and she positioned herself between her cubs and the door. "What is that?" Noah asked, his voice trembling. Mason grabbed the flashlight and directed its beam toward the cabin's front window. Through the snow-crusted glass he caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darker than the night circling the porch. "Not what?" Mason said, his mouth suddenly dry. "Who?" A human figure, bundled against the cold, peered in through the window. The beam of another flashlight swept across the cabin's interior, illuminating the bizarre tableau within. The Morgan family huddled around a fireplace, with a full-grown bear and her cubs. The light paused on the bear, held steady for a long moment, then disappeared. Seconds later, a heavy pounding on the door made them all jump. "Hello in there," a man's voice called, barely audible over the storm. "Forest Service." "I saw lights. Is everyone okay?" Mason and Emma exchanged alarmed glances. The mother bear's growl deepened, her massive body tensing. "What do we do?" Emma whispered. "If they see her?" They all knew what would happen. A wild bear, especially an injured one, with humans would be considered a threat. The Forest Service would have no choice but to put her down. "Forest Service." The voice came again, more insistent. "If you can hear me, please respond." The pounding on the door grew louder. The lock wouldn't hold for long if the ranger decided to force his way in. Mason made a split-second decision. "Take the cubs and hide them in the bedroom," he whispered to Emma. "I'll handle this." "What about her?" Emma nodded toward the mother bear, who showed no signs of moving away from her young. "I'll figure something out," Mason said, though he had no idea what that might be. "Just go." As Emma and the children gathered up the cubs, still wrapped in warm towels, the mother bear watched with obvious distress. She tried to rise, stumbling on her injured leg. "It's okay," Willow said to the bear, her young voice surprisingly steady. "We're not taking them away, we're keeping them safe. Come with us." To Mason's astonishment, the bear seemed to hesitate, then followed as Emma led the strange procession down the hallway toward the bedroom, leaving him alone to face whatever, or whoever, waited on the other side of the door. The pounding came again, and this time, a new voice joined the first. "Mason Morgan, are you in there? It's Ranger Lewis and Deputy Harding from the County Sheriff's Office. We've been checking on cabins affected by the storm." Mason froze. Deputy Rick Harding. They knew each other, not as friends, but as adversaries. Mason had documented and reported illegal hunting in the area last year, and Harding had been implicated, though never charged. If anyone would be eager to find and destroy an injured bear, it would be him. "Just a minute," Mason called back, his mind racing. "Generator's out, trying to find my way to the door." He glanced down the hallway where his family had disappeared with the bears. He could just make out Emma's silhouette in the bedroom doorway, watching anxiously. Another loud thump against the door. "Morgan, open up!" Harding's voice had an edge to it. "We don't have all night to stand out here freezing." Mason took a deep breath, then unlatched the door, opening it just enough to block the view into the cabin while peering out at the visitors. Two men stood on his porch, covered in snow and ice. Ranger Lewis, whom Mason recognized from previous encounters, looked exhausted. Deputy Harding, a stocky man with a perpetual scowl, stood slightly behind him, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Sorry for the delay," Mason said, forcing a smile. "We've been making do with the fireplace since the generator quit." "Everyone okay in there?" Lewis asked. "Your family all accounted for?" "Yes, all fine," Mason replied too quickly. "Just riding out the storm." Deputy Harding narrowed his eyes, trying to peer past Mason into the cabin. "Thought I saw something moving in there, something big." Mason's heart hammered against his ribs. "Just me and my wife getting blankets ready for the kids." "We've been checking the area after reports of unusual animal activity," Lewis explained. "A family about 5 miles east reported seeing a bear with cubs, which is highly unusual this time of year." "Really?" Mason said, feigning surprise. "We haven't seen anything like that." Harding pushed forward slightly. "Mind if we come in and warm up for a few minutes? It's brutal out here." "Actually, Mason began, but was interrupted by a sudden crash from the back of the cabin, followed by what sounded unmistakably like a bear's growl. Both men on the porch tensed. Harding's hand moved to his gun, drawing it smoothly from its holster. "What was that, Morgan?" he demanded. "Sounded like you've got company after all." Before Mason could respond, Ranger Lewis stepped forward, pushing the door open wider. His flashlight beam swept past Mason, illuminating the cabin interior, and the large, damp paw prints clearly visible on the wooden floor. "Jesus Christ," Lewis breathed. "You've got a bear in there, don't you?" The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Mason saw Harding's finger move to the trigger of his gun, saw the glint in the man's eyes. Not fear, but anticipation. "Wait," Mason said desperately. "It's not what you think." But Harding was already shouldering past him, gun raised, moving toward the hallway where the tracks led. "Rick, stop!" Mason grabbed for the deputy's arm but was roughly shoved aside. "Where is it, Morgan?" Harding demanded, his voice eager. "Where's the bear?" From the bedroom doorway came Emma's terrified voice. "Mason, what's happening?" And then, before anyone could react, the mother bear appeared in the hallway, her massive silhouette blocking the passage completely. She stood on all fours, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on the armed men. Harding raised his gun, a smile spreading across his face. "Got you now," he whispered. In that frozen moment, as Mason's world threatened to collapse into tragedy, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Don't you dare shoot that bear in my house." It was Willow, her small frame appearing beside the bear, one hand resting defiantly on the animal's shaggy shoulder. "Willow, get back!" Mason lunged forward, but his daughter stood her ground. "She came to us for help," Willow continued, her voice steady despite the gun pointed in her direction. "Her babies are sick, and she's hurt. Someone already shot her once. She trusted us. She trusted humans." The bear remained oddly still, as if understanding the precarious situation. Behind Willow, Emma appeared with Noah, each of them holding one of the bear cubs wrapped in towels. "Lower your weapon, Deputy," Ranger Lewis said quietly, though his own expression reflected shock at the scene before him. "Are you kidding me?" Harding didn't lower the gun. "That's a wild animal. It's dangerous. And it's illegal to keep wildlife in a private residence." "We're not keeping them," Emma explained, stepping forward cautiously. "We're saving them. The cubs were freezing to death, and the mother is wounded. Once the storm passes, there'll still be wild animals," Harding interrupted. "That mother bear will turn on you the minute she feels strong enough." As if to contradict his words, the bear lowered herself to the floor, her head bowed, no aggression in her posture despite the obvious threat facing her. "Look at her," Mason said, moving slowly to stand between Harding's gun and his family, human and ursine alike. "Does she look like she's about to attack? She sought us out. She asked for our help." "Bears don't ask for help," Harding scoffed. "They're not people." "No," Ranger Lewis said thoughtfully, studying the scene with growing wonder. "They're not people, but sometimes they're more than just animals." He placed a hand on Harding's shoulder. "Lower the gun, Rick. I want to understand what's happening here." For a tense moment, it seemed Harding might refuse. Then, with obvious reluctance, he lowered his weapon. "If that thing so much as twitches wrong," he began. "She has a name," Noah interrupted indignantly, cradling the smaller cub. "We call her Aspen, and her babies are Pine and Willow." "Willow Jr.," his sister corrected with a hint of pride, still standing protectively by the mother bear's side. Ranger Lewis couldn't hide a smile. "Well," he said, holstering his own weapon and removing his snow-covered hat, "I think you'd better tell us exactly how you ended up hosting a bear family in your cabin during the worst storm of the season." As Mason began recounting the evening's extraordinary events, he noticed that Deputy Harding kept his hand near his gun, his eyes never leaving the mother bear. But he also noticed something else. The way Lewis listened with genuine interest, the way his gaze softened when looking at the cubs. Maybe, just maybe, they had found allies instead of executioners. But the night was far from over, and too many lives, human and animal, now balanced precariously under one roof as the storm continued to rage outside. What none of them realized was that this encounter was about to become even more complicated, as secrets buried in the forest and in their own pasts rose to the surface along with the spiraling storm. The cabin grew quieter as Mason finished explaining how they had come to shelter the bear family. Outside, the wind howled with undiminished fury, occasionally sending gusts down the chimney that made the fire sputter and dance, The two cubs, wrapped in towels, had begun to show signs of life, their tiny bodies warming slowly under Emma's care. Ranger Lewis removed his heavy coat and hung it by the door, a gesture that suggested he intended to stay. Deputy Harding remained standing, his posture rigid with disapproval. "In 20 years with the Forest Service, I've never seen anything like this," Lewis said, shaking his head in amazement. "Animals sometimes approach humans when desperate, but a mother bear with cubs? They're usually the most aggressive, the most likely to avoid human contact at all costs." "Something drove them from their den," Emma said, gently rubbing one of the cubs with a towel. "And something or someone shot her." All eyes turned to Harding, whose face remained impassive. "Don't look at me," he said defensively. "Hunting bears is strictly regulated, and I follow the rules." Mason bit back a retort. He had his suspicions about Harding's adherence to hunting regulations, but now wasn't the time to voice them. "The wound is recent," Emma continued, "within the last day or two, and the bullet's still inside her." Lewis frowned. "Bear season closed months ago. Anyone shooting a bear now, especially a mother with cubs, is breaking the law." "Poachers," Mason suggested. "There have been reports of increased activity in the National Forest this winter." "Tourists with more money than sense," Harding added unexpectedly, "paying guides for illegal trophy hunts." Lewis nodded. "We've been trying to crack down on it, but it's a big forest and we're short-staffed." The mother bear, Aspen, as the children had named her, watched the conversation with uncanny awareness, her dark eyes moving from speaker to speaker. She had positioned herself so that her body formed a protective barrier between her cubs and Deputy Harding. "She needs medical attention," Emma said, gesturing to the wound on Aspen's flank. "The bullet needs to come out, and the wound needs to be cleaned and treated for infection." "You're suggesting veterinary surgery in a cabin during a blizzard?" Harding's tone was incredulous. "On a wild bear?" "Unless you have a better idea," Emma replied evenly. "I've assisted with emergency surgeries before. I know what to do." "And what happens when she wakes up from your amateur operation?" Harding challenged. "When the pain makes her lash out?" "She won't," Willow said with absolute conviction. "She knows we're helping." Harding snorted. "Kids and their fairy tales." "Actually," Lewis interjected, "there have been documented cases of wild animals seeking human help when injured. It's rare, but not unheard of." He knelt beside Aspen, keeping a respectful distance. "This one's smart. You can see it in her eyes." Mason found himself studying the deputy more carefully. Something about Harding's reaction seemed off. The man was too interested in the bear, too fixated on her wound. "Where exactly were these poachers reported?" Mason asked casually. Harding's eyes flickered away. "North Ridge, near Blackwater Creek." Lewis looked up sharply. "That's not right. The reports came from the eastern section, near Miller's Gap." A tense silence fell over the room. Harding's hand drifted toward his weapon again. "That's odd," Mason said, maintaining a conversational tone while positioning himself between Harding and his family. "Because I was photographing near Blackwater Creek 2 days ago, and I heard gunshots. Didn't see any hunters, though." "Must have been echoes," Harding said tersely. "Sound carries strangely in the mountains." Aspen suddenly raised her head, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Her eyes were fixed on Harding, and there was something in them now that hadn't been there before. Recognition. "I think," Mason said slowly, the pieces clicking into place, "that she knows you, Deputy." Harding's face hardened. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Mason persisted. because it seems to me that Aspen here has a very specific reaction to your presence, almost like she remembers you from somewhere." "Mason," Emma warned, sensing the mounting tension. But Mason couldn't stop now. The bear's behavior, Harding's evasiveness, the location of the gunshots, it all pointed to one conclusion. "You shot her," Mason said flatly. "You were hunting illegally near Blackwater Creek, and you shot a mother bear with cubs. You can't prove that," Harding replied too quickly. "Maybe not," Ranger Lewis said, rising to his feet. His expression had changed, becoming official, professional. "But I can investigate the ballistics. If the bullet in that bear matches your service weapon—" With startling speed, Harding drew his gun. "Nobody's investigating anything," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "That bear is evidence of my mistake, and it needs to be eliminated, along with anyone who might report what happened here." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly from tense to dangerous. Mason stepped in front of his family, heart pounding. "Think about what you're doing, Rick," Lewis said calmly, his hands raised. "This isn't worth throwing your life away over." "My career is already over if this gets out," Harding replied. "Illegal hunting? Shooting a protected species? I'd lose my badge, maybe go to prison." His laugh was bitter. "All because of a damn bear that should have had the decency to die in the forest where I left it." "You left her to die?" Willow's voice was small but fierce. "With babies depending on her?" Harding ignored the child, his gun trained on Mason. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to finish what I started with the bear. Then we're going to chalk this up to a tragic accident during the storm. A wild animal attacked, and I was forced to defend you all." "Nobody will believe that," Mason said. "They will when 2 law enforcement officers give matching statements," Harding countered, glancing at Lewis. "Right, Ranger." Lewis shook his head. "This isn't who you are, Rick. You made a mistake, but this would be deliberate murder." For a moment, doubt flickered across Harding's face. Then his expression hardened again. "I'm not going to prison for a bear." What happened next occurred so quickly that Mason would later struggle to piece together the sequence of events. As Harding's finger tightened on the trigger, Aspen suddenly lurched to her feet with unexpected strength. Not toward Harding, as everyone expected, but toward Willow, knocking the child safely behind the bulk of the sofa. The gun fired, the sound deafening in the confined space of the cabin. Aspen roared, a sound of pain and fury that seemed to shake the very walls. Lewis tackled Harding from the side, sending them both crashing into the wooden dining table, which collapsed under their combined weight. Mason rushed to Willow, finding her unharmed but terrified behind the sofa. Emma had gathered Noah and the cubs into her arms, pulling them toward the relative safety of the hallway. "Mason!" Emma cried, pointing. Aspen stood swaying in the middle of the room, fresh blood flowing from a new wound in her shoulder. Despite her injuries, she remained upright, her attention fixed on the struggling men on the floor. Harding had lost his grip on the gun during the fall. It had skidded across the floor and now lay just feet from where Mason crouched with Willow. "Get the gun!" Lewis shouted, grappling with Harding, who fought with the strength of desperation. Mason lunged for the weapon, but Harding broke free from Lewis's grip and scrambled toward it as well. Their hands reached the gun at the same time, and for a terrifying moment they struggled for control, the barrel swinging wildly between them. Then a massive paw slammed down on Harding's arm, pinning it to the floor. Aspen stood over him, her jaws inches from his face, blood dripping from her wounds onto his chest. One bite, one swipe of her claws, and Harding's life would end. The deputy froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Don't let it kill me," he whispered. Everyone in the cabin held their breath. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and Aspen's labored breathing. The bear's eyes seemed to hold not just animal instinct, but something deeper, a weighing of options, a consideration of consequences. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her paw from Harding's arm and backed away, her message clear. She had chosen mercy over vengeance. Lewis quickly secured the gun and pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt. "Deputy Richard Harding, you're under arrest for illegal hunting, attempted murder, and a whole list of charges that the district attorney is going to have a field day with." As Lewis secured the handcuffs around Harding's wrists, Aspen collapsed onto her side, her strength finally giving out. Fresh blood pooled beneath her massive body, and her breathing came in shallow, rapid pants. "Emma!" Mason called urgently. "She's losing too much blood." Emma rushed to the bear's side, medical kit in hand. "I need light, clean towels and hot water," she instructed. "And someone needs to hold this flashlight steady. I've got to get both bullets out now, or she won't make it till morning." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Lewis asked, Harding now securely bound and propped against the wall. "Keep him quiet and out of the way," Emma replied, nodding toward the deputy. "And pray that I remember enough from my veterinary training to save a half-ton wild animal with a first aid kit and kitchen utensils." As Emma prepared for impromptu surgery, Willow and Noah knelt beside the mother bear, stroking her fur and murmuring words of encouragement. The cubs, now more alert thanks to the warming treatment, whimpered and pawed at their mother's face. "You can do this," Mason told his wife, holding the flashlight steady as she sterilized what instruments she had. Emma nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. "I have to," she said quietly, "because if she dies, those cubs die too. And after everything she's done to protect them, to protect our children, I can't let that happen." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the small cabin, but inside, an even more desperate battle was about to begin. A fight for survival that would forge an unbreakable bond between two mothers from different worlds, united by the most primal instinct of all, the drive to protect their young at any cost. As Emma made the first incision into Aspen's wounded flank, the bear's eyes found hers. There was pain there, certainly, but also something else. A trust so profound, so contrary to natural law, that it brought tears to Emma's eyes. "I won't let you down," she promised, her voice breaking. "Just stay with me, Aspen. Stay with me." In that moment, surrounded by her family and facing the greatest challenge of her life, Emma felt a strange certainty settle over her. This night would change them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Time seemed to stretch and compress as Emma worked to save Aspen's life. The cabin had transformed into a makeshift operating room. The dining table now surgery station after Mason and Lewis had righted it, covering it with clean sheets. Candles and the flashlight provided unsteady illumination as Emma's hands moved with surprising confidence, considering the enormity of what she was attempting. "I need more light here," Emma said, her voice tight with concentration. She was probing for the first bullet, the one that had been festering in Aspen's flank for days. Mason adjusted the flashlight, his other hand resting gently on the bear's massive head. Against all logic, Aspen remained conscious but eerily calm throughout the procedure, as if she understood that this pain was necessary for healing. "I've never seen anything like this," Ranger Lewis murmured, holding a bowl of hot water and clean cloths. "She should be sedated for this kind of procedure." "We don't have the drugs," Emma replied, not looking up from her work, "and we can't wait." From his position against the wall, handcuffed and sullen, Deputy Harding watched with a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been shame. That bear should have charged or passed out from the pain by now, he said. It's not natural. Maybe we don't know as much about natural as we think we do, Mason replied, stroking Aspen's fur. The bear's eyes remained fixed on Emma, occasionally shifting to check on her cubs, who were nestled together near the fireplace under Willow and Noah's watchful care. "Got it," Emma announced, a note of triumph in her voice as she extracted a misshapen bullet from Aspen's flesh. She dropped it into a small metal bowl with a satisfying clink. "One down, one to go." Lewis examined the bloody projectile. "Standard hunting round," he confirmed. "And it'll match Harding's weapon, I'd bet my badge on it." "What are you going to do with him?" Mason asked quietly, nodding toward the deputy. Lewis's expression hardened. "Once the storm breaks, I'm taking him in. Illegal hunting, attempted murder, abuse of power, the list goes on." He glanced at Harding, who stared back with undisguised hostility. "He's done in law enforcement. Probably looking at serious prison time. If we make it through the night," Harding muttered. "That storm's getting worse, not better." As if to emphasize his point, a violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, making the windows rattle ominously. The temperature had continued to drop, and despite the fire, their breath was visible in the air. "Dad," Noah called from beside the fireplace, "the cubs are getting more active." Indeed, the two small bears were now squirming and making soft, chirping sounds, their eyes blinking open as they regained strength. Mason smiled despite the tension. "That's good, buddy. It means they're warming up." "But they're hungry," Willow added, concern in her voice. "What do baby bears eat?" "Milk, normally," Emma answered, still focused on locating the second bullet in Aspen's shoulder. "But we don't exactly have bear milk on hand." "Would regular milk work?" Noah asked. "Maybe," Lewis suggested. "Thinned with a bit of water. Bears are omnivores, so they're more adaptable than some animals." Mason moved to the kitchen area, rummaging through their supplies. "We've got powdered milk. We could mix it with warm water, make it fairly dilute." "Try it," Emma agreed, her hand steady as she worked deeper into Aspen's wound. "They need something in their systems." As Mason prepared the makeshift formula, Lewis suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the window. "Did you hear that?" Everyone fell silent, listening. At first, there was only the howling of the wind and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Then it came again, a distant sound almost lost in the storm. A voice? "Someone's out there," Lewis said, moving to the window and wiping away the condensation. "Another ranger?" Mason suggested, bringing the warm milk mixture to Willow and Noah for the cubs. Lewis shook his head, peering into the darkness. "We were the only patrol in this sector tonight." He cupped his hands around his eyes, pressing his face closer to the glass. "I can't see anything but snow." The voice came again, closer this time. A shout carried on the wind, impossible to make out but unmistakably human. "Whoever it is, they're in trouble," Mason said. "No one should be out in this weather." Lewis grabbed his coat. "I need to check. They could freeze to death out there." "It could be a trick," Harding warned from his place against the wall. "Poachers work in groups. Could be my hunting partners looking for me." Lewis hesitated, then grabbed his gun from the table where he'd placed it. "You stay put," he told Harding. "Mason, keep an eye on him." "Be careful," Emma said without looking up from her surgical task. "We don't need another patient." Lewis nodded, pulling on his heavy coat, gloves, and hat. "I'll just check the immediate area around the cabin. Won't go far in this visibility." He unlocked the door, and instantly the cabin was filled with swirling snow and biting cold. Lewis pushed his way outside, pulling the door closed behind him. "The second bullet's lodged against her shoulder blade," Emma announced, her forehead beaded with sweat despite the cold. "It's deeper than I expected." Mason returned to her side, holding the flashlight steady. "Can you get it?" "I have to," Emma replied grimly. "If I leave it, infection will set in. She's already fighting one infected wound. A second might be too much even for her." At the fireplace, Willow and Noah were carefully feeding the cubs, using makeshift bottles fashioned from clean dishcloths dipped in the milk mixture. The tiny bears suckled eagerly, their initial wariness of the human children apparently forgotten in their hunger. "They're so cute," Noah whispered, clearly enchanted as one of the cubs pawed at his hand. "Can we keep them?" "No, honey," Emma called over her shoulder. "They belong in the wild with their mother." "But what if Aspen doesn't?" Willow began, then stopped, unwilling to voice the possibility that the mother bear might not survive. "She'll make it," Mason said with more confidence than he felt. "Your mom knows what she's doing." Aspen's breathing had become more labored, her massive sides heaving with each inhale. Her eyes, though still alert, held a glassy quality that worried Mason. "She's going into shock," Emma murmured. "We need to keep her warm and get this done quickly." A sudden crash from outside made them all jump. It was followed by Lewis's voice, shouting something indistinct. "What's happening out there?" Mason moved toward the window, straining to see through the white curtain of snow. Before anyone could respond, the cabin door burst open again. Ranger Lewis stumbled backward through the entrance, nearly falling. He was not alone. A tall figure followed him inside, bundled so thoroughly against the cold that it was impossible to discern any features. Snow and ice covered the newcomer from head to toe, giving them an almost spectral appearance. "Close the door," Lewis gasped, regaining his balance. The stranger complied, shutting out the howling storm before turning to face the room. Slowly, gloved hands rose to pull down a frost-covered scarf and push back a hood, revealing the face of a woman in her late 50s, her skin weathered by years in the outdoors, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight braid. "Catherine Blackwood," Harding spat from his position against the wall, recognition and alarm mingling in his voice. The woman's sharp eyes took in the extraordinary scene. The wounded bear on the table, the cubs by the fire, the handcuffed deputy, the blood-spattered family. Her expression revealed nothing but a slight raising of her eyebrows. "Well," she said in a deep, steady voice, "it seems I've walked into quite a situation." She unwound her scarf with deliberate movements. "And it appears my suspicions were correct. Someone has indeed been hunting on my land." "Your land?" Mason asked, confused. "We're inside the National Forest boundary." "No," Lewis corrected him. "The Morgan cabin sits just on the edge of the forest. The property line runs about 100 yards from here." He nodded toward Catherine. "Miss Blackwood owns most of the adjacent land, 5,000 acres of private wilderness. A wildlife sanctuary," Catherine added, fixing Harding with a cold stare, "where hunting is expressly forbidden." Understanding dawned on Mason. "You're the conservationist, the one who's been buying up land around the National Forest to create protected corridors for wildlife." Catherine nodded, removing her heavy coat to reveal sturdy outdoor clothing beneath. "I've dedicated my life to protecting these mountains and their inhabitants." Her gaze shifted to Aspen. "Including her." Emma looked up from her work, surprise evident on her face. "You know this bear?" "I know all the bears in these mountains," Catherine replied, approaching the table cautiously. "Aspen was named for the grove where I first observed her 3 years ago. She's one of the most intelligent bears I've ever studied." "Studied?" Harding scoffed. "You mean you've been interfering with wild animals, getting them used to humans. That's why this one acted so unnaturally. It's your fault." Catherine ignored him, examining Aspen's wounds with a practiced eye. "I observe and document. I never feed or directly interact with the wildlife. They remain wild." She looked at Emma's handiwork with approval. "You have skill. Veterinary training?" "Assistant," Emma confirmed. "But it's been a few years, and I've never worked on anything larger than a German Shepherd." "You're doing well," Catherine assured her. "Though I have more appropriate equipment in my pack if you'd allow me to assist." "Please," Emma said, relief evident in her voice. Catherine turned to Lewis. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to her backpack. The ranger nodded, and Catherine quickly retrieved what looked like a professional field medical kit. Inside were proper surgical tools, antibiotics, and even a small vial of what she explained was a mild sedative. "Not enough to knock her out completely," Catherine said, preparing a syringe, "but enough to ease her pain without endangering her cubs." "How did you find us in this storm?" Mason asked as Catherine administered the sedative to Aspen with practiced ease. "I wasn't looking for you specifically," she replied, waiting for the medication to take effect before joining Emma at the wound site. "I've been tracking Aspen since she and her cubs disappeared from their usual denning area 3 days ago. Then I heard gunshots." Her eyes flicked to Harding, who looked away. "I found blood trails, followed them as best I could. The storm made it difficult, but I know these mountains better than most. When I saw lights in your cabin, I thought to ask if you'd seen any signs of an injured bear." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I didn't expect to find her on your dining table. She came to us," Willow explained earnestly from her position by the cubs. "She asked for help." Catherine's expression softened as she regarded the child. "Yes," she said simply. "Some animals know more than we give them credit for." With Catherine's expertise and proper tools, the extraction of the second bullet proceeded much more smoothly. Within 20 minutes, the misshapen piece of metal joined the first in the bowl, and Catherine was helping Emma clean and properly dress both wounds. "She's lucky," Catherine commented, applying an antibiotic salve to the sutured injuries. "The first bullet missed vital organs, and the second didn't shatter the shoulder blade. With proper care, she should recover fully." "What happens to her now?" Mason asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. Catherine surveyed the family, her gaze lingering on Willow and Noah, who continued to tend to the cubs with obvious affection. "Ideally, once the storm passes, we move her and her cubs to my sanctuary. I have facilities there designed for wildlife rehabilitation." "And then?" Emma prompted, washing Aspen's blood from her hands in a basin of warm water. "And then they return to the wild when she's healed," Catherine replied firmly, "where they belong." A visible sadness passed over the children's faces, though neither protested. They understood, even at their young ages, that this was the right course of action. "They'll need names," Willow said, stroking the more active cub's head. "The cubs, I mean, if they're going to be living at Miss Blackwood's sanctuary for a while." Catherine considered this. "I generally don't name the animals I study," she said. "It's important to maintain professional distance. But just temporary names," Noah pleaded. "While they're getting better." After a moment's hesitation, Catherine nodded. "I suppose that would be acceptable." "We already picked Pine for this one," Willow said, indicating the larger cub. "And Willow Jr. for her sister." Appropriate forest names, Catherine acknowledged with a slight smile. "I can work with those." As the impromptu surgery concluded, They moved Aspen to a comfortable position on the floor near the fireplace, where her cubs immediately snuggled against her still sedated form. The massive bear's breathing had steadied, and her pulse, according to Catherine's expert assessment, was stronger. "She'll sleep for a few hours," Catherine explained, washing her hands. "The sedative I gave her was mild, but combined with her exhaustion and blood loss, she'll need time to recover." "What about him?" Lewis asked, nodding toward Harding, who had remained conspicuously silent during Catherine's arrival and the subsequent surgery. Catherine's expression hardened as she regarded the deputy. Hunting bears out of season, shooting a mother with cubs, trespassing on posted land, attempting to cover up your crimes with further violence. She shook her head in disgust. "The prosecutor will have a field day." "If anyone believes this crazy story," Harding retorted, though his earlier confidence had clearly eroded. "A bear seeking human help? Cooperating during surgery? It sounds like a children's fairy tale." "I have trail cameras throughout my property," Catherine replied coolly, "including several that captured you tracking Aspen and her cubs across my land. The timestamps will match perfectly with your duty schedule, I imagine." Harding's face paled. "You can't prove it was me. I was wearing a red and black hunting jacket, a distinctive tasseled hat." "Yes, I have quite clear images," Catherine interrupted. "Technology has come a long way, Deputy Harding." The implication hung in the air. Catherine had evidence, definitive, irrefutable evidence, of Harding's illegal hunting activities. The deputy slumped against the wall, the fight visibly draining from him. "I need to secure him somewhere for the night," Lewis said. "I don't want him near the children or the bears." "The back bedroom has a solid door," Mason suggested. "We can lock him in there until morning." Lewis nodded, pulling Harding to his feet. "Let's go." As they disappeared down the hallway, Emma turned to Catherine with obvious curiosity. "How did you get involved in wildlife conservation?" "If you don't mind my asking." Catherine's weathered face revealed little, but something in her eyes softened. "I wasn't always a conservationist," she admitted, accepting a cup of hot tea that Mason had prepared. "I used to be on the other side of the equation." "A hunter?" Mason asked. "A trophy hunter," Catherine clarified, her voice tinged with old regret. "From a family of trophy hunters. The Blackwoods have been hunting these mountains for generations. My father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all of them saw wildlife as commodities to be harvested, trophies to be mounted on walls." She paused, taking a sip of tea. Outside, the storm continued unabated, making the windows rattle. "What changed?" Emma prompted gently. Catherine set down her cup. 20 years ago, I shot a mother bear much like Aspen. She had cubs, 2 of them. I didn't see them until after she was down." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes revealed old pain. "The cubs wouldn't leave their mother's body. They stayed with her, nudging her, trying to wake her up, for hours. The cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of Aspen and her cubs. I had never considered the animals I hunted as anything more than targets," Catherine continued. "Seeing those cubs grieving, there's no other word for it, changed something fundamental in me. I realized these creatures weren't just objects. They were families. They experienced loss. They loved." "What happened to the cubs?" Willow asked in a small voice. "I tried to save them," Catherine replied. "Took them to a wildlife rehabilitation center. But they were too young, too traumatized. They didn't survive." She looked at the sleeping bear family by the fire. "That's why I started buying land, setting up the sanctuary, trying to atone for the harm I'd done." Mason found himself deeply moved by Catherine's story, by the honesty of it, and by the profound transformation it represented. "From hunter to protector," he murmured. "We all have the capacity to change," Catherine said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "Even those who seem most set in their ways." She nodded toward the hallway where Lewis had taken Harding. "Perhaps even your deputy will find his moment of clarity." "I wouldn't count on it," Mason replied skeptically. Catherine shrugged. "I wouldn't have counted on me changing either. Yet here we are." Lewis returned from securing Harding, rubbing his hands together against the cold. "He's locked in, though not happy about it. I've confiscated everything he could potentially use as a weapon." "Good," Mason said. "I don't trust him, even handcuffed." "Nor should you," Lewis agreed. "Men like Harding don't take defeat well." Catherine had moved to examine the cubs more closely, her expert hands checking their vital signs and overall condition. "They're doing remarkably well, considering what they've been through," she reported, "thanks to your quick action." "Will they remember this?" Noah asked. "When they go back to the wild, will they remember that we helped them?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "Bears have excellent memories," she said. "Aspen will certainly remember. As for the cubs," she smiled at the boy, "they're very young, but experiences during these formative months can shape their perception of the world. So yes, in some way, they may remember." "I hope they don't think all humans are nice because of us," Willow said with surprising wisdom. "That could be dangerous for them." "A very astute observation," Catherine approved. "That's why rehabilitation has to be done carefully. We want them to survive in the wild, which means maintaining a healthy wariness of humans generally." The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a sharp crack from outside, louder and more distinctive than the sounds of the storm. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Emma asked, moving instinctively closer to her children. Lewis frowned, moving toward the window. "Sounded like a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice." Another crack followed, this one accompanied by a deep groaning sound. Mason joined Lewis at the window, trying to peer through the darkness and swirling snow. "I can't see anything, but it sounds close. Maybe one of the old pines near the cabin." Catherine's expression had grown concerned. "Ice storms like this can bring down trees that have stood for centuries," she said. "If one of those massive pines comes down on the cabin—" She didn't need to finish the thought. A direct hit from one of the towering pines that surrounded the cabin could crush the roof, potentially killing everyone inside. As if summoned by the thought, a tremendous creaking sound emanated from directly above them, the distinct sound of wood beginning to splinter. "The roof," Mason gasped, looking up at the ceiling. "Something's pressing on it." "Everyone away from the center of the room," Lewis ordered, moving quickly. "Against the walls." They scrambled to comply, Emma grabbing the children while Mason and Catherine carefully moved the still sedated Aspen and her cubs to the relative safety of the corner nearest the fireplace. The creaking intensified, and a fine shower of dust descended from the ceiling beams. In the flickering light of the fire and remaining candles, they could see the central beam beginning to bow under tremendous pressure. "It won't hold," Catherine said grimly. "Not if it's one of the big ones." Another ominous crack split the air, and a section of the ceiling visibly depressed. "We need to get out," Lewis urged, already moving toward the door, "before it comes down on us." "Into the blizzard?" Emma protested, holding the children close. "We'd freeze within hours." "Better than being crushed," Lewis countered. Mason's mind raced, evaluating their limited options. "The old mining tunnel," he said suddenly. It runs under the property, connects to the root cellar. You're sure it's still intact? Louis asked. Most of those old tunnels have collapsed. My grandfather reinforced this one years ago, used it for storage, Mason explained hurriedly. It should still be sound, and it leads away from the cabin, emerges about a quarter-mile into the forest. Another section of ceiling sagged dangerously, and a narrow fissure appeared in the wooden beams. We don't have much choice, Catherine said, already gathering her medical supplies. How do we access it? Trapdoor in the pantry, Mason replied, moving quickly in that direction. We need to hurry. What about Harding? Louis asked. A moment of moral reckoning hung in the air. The deputy had threatened their lives, had tried to kill them all to cover his crimes, but leaving him to die... I'll get him, Louis decided, heading toward the back bedroom. The rest of you start down, I'll follow. And Aspen? Willow asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the sedated bear. We can't leave her. Mason and Emma exchanged desperate glances. Moving an unconscious, full-grown bear through a trap door and into a narrow tunnel seemed impossible. I gave her a mild sedative, Catherine said, kneeling beside the massive animal. Perhaps we can rouse her enough to get her moving under her own power. She produced a small vial from her medical kit and quickly administered an injection into the bear's haunch. A mild stimulant, she explained. It should counteract some of the sedative effects without causing her pain to return too quickly. The ceiling gave another ominous groan, and this time a small section near the center actually splintered, allowing a shower of snow and ice to sift through. No more time, Mason urged, lifting the trapdoor in the pantry to reveal a dark passage below. Emma, take the children down first. I'll bring a lantern. Emma hesitated, clearly torn between helping Aspen and protecting her children. Go, Catherine insisted. I'll handle the bears. Get your children to safety. With a reluctant nod, Emma guided Willow and Noah toward the trapdoor. Mason held it open as they climbed down the sturdy wooden ladder into the darkness below. There's a tunnel to your right, he called down to them. Follow it away from the cabin. I'll be right behind you with light. As Emma and the children descended, Louis returned with Harding, who was still handcuffed but now wearing his heavy coat. Move, Louis ordered, pushing the deputy toward the trapdoor. You expect me to go down there? Harding balked, eyeing the dark hole with suspicion. Into some ancient tunnel that's probably ready to collapse. Another section of ceiling gave way, this one larger, sending a cascade of snow and wood fragments onto the floor just feet from where they stood. Your choice, Louis said grimly. Tunnel or stay here and take your chances. With a curse, Harding awkwardly maneuvered himself down the ladder, his handcuffed wrists making the descent precarious. Meanwhile, Catherine's efforts to rouse Aspen were beginning to show results. The bear's massive head lifted slightly, her eyes blinking open in confusion. That's it, girl, Catherine encouraged. We need you on your feet, just for a little while. The cubs, sensing their mother's movement, became more active, pawing at her face and making urgent sounds. Whether responding to Catherine's voice, her cub's distress, or some primal instinct warning of danger, Aspen began to struggle to her feet, swaying unsteadily. Good, Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. Mason, lead the way with the lantern. I'll guide Aspen with her cubs. Louis can bring up the rear. Mason quickly lit the old hurricane lantern they kept for emergencies, its warm glow barely penetrating the darkness of the tunnel below. This way, he said, holding the trapdoor wider. The tunnel's high enough for her to move through, though it'll be a tight fit. With Catherine's gentle urging, and the cubs leading the way, Aspen lumbered toward the trapdoor. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the opening might be too small for her bulk, but with some awkward maneuvering, the bear managed to squeeze through, landing with a heavy thud on the earthen floor below. Catherine quickly followed, gathering up the cubs and placing them near their mother. "Come on," she called up. "It's collapsing." She was right. The ceiling was now visibly sagging across its entire span, and the ominous sounds of splintering wood filled the cabin. Mason and Lewis exchanged one last look, then plunged into the darkness below, pulling the trapdoor closed just as the deafening sound of the ceiling giving way erupted above them. The impact shook the ground beneath their feet, sending dirt and small stones showering down from the tunnel roof. For a terrifying moment, Mason feared the tunnel would collapse as well, burying them alive. But his grandfather's reinforcement work held, and after a few tense seconds, the shaking subsided. In the dim light of the lantern, they could make out the rest of their group further down the tunnel. Emma and the children huddled together, their faces pale with fear. Harding sat against one wall, his expression unreadable in the shadows, and Aspen, still groggy but upright, stood with her cubs pressed against her legs, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Everyone okay?" Mason called, raising the lantern higher to better illuminate the space. A chorus of affirmative responses came back, though Willow's voice trembled as she asked, "Is our house gone, Dad?" Mason exchanged a look with Emma, neither wanting to voice the likely truth. "We'll assess the damage when the storm passes," he said instead. "For now, we need to keep moving. It's too cold to stay in place." "Where does this tunnel lead exactly?" Catherine asked, helping Aspen to start moving again. "About a quarter-mile east," Mason replied, leading the way. "It opens near an old hunting cabin my grandfather used, much smaller than our main cabin but solid. If it's still standing, it should provide shelter until the storm passes." "And if it's not?" Lewis asked quietly, falling into step beside Mason. Mason had no answer for that. If the hunting cabin had also succumbed to the ice storm, their options would be severely limited. The main road was miles away, impassable in the blizzard conditions. The nearest neighbor was even further. The tunnel was cold, but at least they were out of the direct assault of the storm. Their breath formed clouds in the chilled air as they moved forward, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional whimper from the cubs. Aspen followed Catherine with surprising docility, though Mason suspected it was more due to her weakened state and the sedative than any true domestication. "How much farther?" Emma asked after they'd been walking for what seemed like an eternity. The children were tiring, their initial fear giving way to exhaustion. "Not far now," Mason assured her, though, in truth, the tunnel seemed longer than he remembered from childhood explorations. Just around this next bend, there should be a set of stairs leading up to the cabin floor. As they rounded the corner, however, they were met not with stairs but with a solid wall of collapsed earth and rock. The passage was completely blocked. "No," Mason breathed, raising the lantern higher as if the obstacle might somehow disappear in better light. "This can't be right." "Tunnel collapse," Lewis said grimly, examining the blockage. "Probably years ago, judging by how packed the soil is." "Is there another way out?" Emma asked, trying to keep panic from her voice for the children's sake. Mason closed his eyes, trying to recall the tunnel system from memory. His grandfather had shown him these passages as a boy, telling stories of how they were used during Prohibition to transport illegal liquor. But that was decades ago, and Mason's recollections were fuzzy at best. "There might be a side passage," he said finally, opening his eyes. "Further back, maybe 50 yards from where we entered. It branched off to the west, I think." "You think?" Harding spoke up for the first time since entering the tunnel, his tone caustic. "So, we're wandering around in an unstable mine tunnel on a hunch. At least, we're not under a collapsed roof, Lewis countered, silencing the deputy with a stern look. Catherine had been examining the cave-in with professional interest. This collapse is old, she confirmed. But that might actually help us. How so? Mason asked. If it happened years ago and the rest of the tunnel has remained stable despite heavy storms like this one, it suggests the overall structure is sound, she explained. We're probably safer down here than we would be above ground right now. The logic was reassuring, but it didn't solve their immediate problem. They were still trapped underground with an injured bear, 2 cubs, 2 children, and a hostile prisoner, with no clear exit in sight. Let's backtrack and look for that side passage, Lewis suggested, taking the practical approach. Meanwhile, we should conserve the lantern fuel. It might be a long night. Mason nodded agreement, turning down the flame slightly before leading the group back the way they had come. Emma carried Noah, who was nearly asleep on his feet, while Willow walked beside Catherine, her small hand occasionally reaching out to touch one of the cubs for reassurance. They moved more slowly now, Mason scanning the tunnel walls carefully for any sign of the side passage he half remembered. The air grew noticeably colder as they retreated toward the entrance, and Mason belatedly realized another problem they would face: freezing temperatures. The tunnel, while protecting them from the direct effects of the storm, offered little insulation against the bitter cold. There, Willow suddenly said, pointing to a dark recess in the tunnel wall that the adults had overlooked. Is that it, Dad? Mason raised the lantern, illuminating what was indeed a narrow opening, more of a crevice than a proper passage, but definitely man-made, with rough-hewn wooden supports framing the entrance. Good eye, Willow, he said with genuine admiration. That could be it. The passage was narrower than the main tunnel, requiring them to proceed in single file. For a moment, Mason worried that Aspen would be unable to navigate the tight space, but Catherine coaxed her through, the bear's powerful shoulders just squeezing past the support timbers. As they ventured deeper into this new tunnel, the air changed subtly. It became less stagnant, with the faintest hint of moving air, a promising sign that this passage might indeed lead to the surface. Do you feel that? Emma asked, lifting her head. A draft. There must be an opening ahead, Lewis agreed, his spirits visibly lifting. They pressed forward with renewed energy, following the winding passage as it gradually sloped upward. After another 100 yards or so, they came to a junction where the tunnel split in 2 directions. Mason hesitated, holding the lantern high to examine both options. I don't remember this, he admitted. The moving air is coming from the right passage, Catherine observed, closing her eyes to better sense the subtle air currents. That's our best bet for finding an exit. No one disagreed with her assessment, and they turned right, the tunnel continuing its gentle upward slope. The cubs, seeming to sense the promise of open space ahead, became more energetic, tugging at Catherine's pant legs as she guided their mother forward. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, they found not an open exit, but a crude wooden door, partially rotted but still intact, secured with an ancient padlock. Stand back, Lewis said, motioning everyone away from the door. With a well-placed kick, he shattered the decayed wood around the lock, and the door swung inward with a protesting creak of rusted hinges. Beyond lay not the forest, as they had hoped, but another enclosed space, a small room with rough stone walls, a dirt floor, and a ceiling of wooden beams. A root cellar by the looks of it, with ancient dusty shelves lining the walls and the remnants of what might have been food storage containers scattered about. This isn't the hunting cabin, Mason said, his disappointment evident. It's just an old root cellar. But where does it lead? Emma asked, scanning the walls for another exit. Catherine had already begun examining the space systematically, running her hands along the rough stone walls. "There's fresher air coming from somewhere," she said. "This isn't a dead end." Lewis joined her search, moving to the far corner of the cellar where the ceiling beams met the wall. "Here," he called, pointing upward. "There's a hatch in the ceiling." Sure enough, a square wooden trapdoor was set into the ceiling beams, practically invisible in the dim lantern light due to years of dust and cobwebs. "Can we reach it?" Emma asked, sizing up the distance. The ceiling was high, at least 9 feet from the dirt floor, with no ladder or steps in sight. "I can boost someone up," Mason offered, setting the lantern on a shelf. "I'm the lightest," Catherine said practically, "and I'm used to climbing. If you can get me high enough to grab the edge, I can do the rest." With Lewis's help, Mason created a human platform, bracing himself against the wall while Catherine climbed nimbly onto his shoulders. Even with this boost, she had to stretch to her full height to reach the trapdoor, her fingers just managing to hook the edge. "It's stuck," she reported, pushing upward. "Years of disuse, probably." "Put your back into it, woman," Harding muttered from where he sat, slumped against the wall. Catherine ignored him, concentrating instead on applying steady pressure to the ancient wood. With a sudden crack that made everyone jump, the trapdoor gave way, swinging upward into darkness. A shower of dirt and snow cascaded down, temporarily blinding Catherine. "I see stars," she coughed, wiping her eyes. "We've found a way out." Hope surged through the group as Catherine pulled herself up through the opening with surprising agility for a woman her age. She disappeared from view momentarily, then her face reappeared in the square opening, now illuminated by starlight. "The storm has passed," she reported, her voice filled with wonder. "And you won't believe where we are." One by one, they made their way through the hatch, with Lewis giving Mason and Emma boosts to help the children up, and finally managing to haul a reluctant Harding through the opening by his handcuffed wrists. Getting Aspen up presented a greater challenge. The bear was stronger now, the stimulant having countered much of the sedative, but the opening was too high for her to reach and too small for her bulk. The cubs, however, were small enough to be lifted, and Catherine and Emma carefully passed them up to Willow and Noah, who stood waiting in the snow above. "We need to enlarge the opening," Mason said, examining the wooden frame of the trapdoor, "or find something sturdy enough to use as a ramp." They searched the area above ground, discovering they had emerged into a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. The storm had indeed passed, leaving behind a crystalline winter landscape bathed in starlight and a nearly full moon. The tree branches hung heavy with ice that glinted like thousands of diamonds in the moonlight. And there, not 50 yards away, stood a small stone structure, weather-beaten but intact. "The hunting cabin," Mason breathed, recognizing it at last. "We made it after all. The root cellar must have been connected to it originally, before this section of the forest grew over." "There's wood stacked along the side," Lewis reported after a quick investigation. "Looks solid. We can use it to build a ramp for Aspen." Working quickly in the cold, they constructed a makeshift ramp down into the root cellar, bracing it securely against the lip of the trapdoor opening. Catherine coaxed Aspen from below, while Mason and Lewis anchored the top of the ramp. The bear approached the slope cautiously, sniffing suspiciously at the unfamiliar construction. Her cubs, sensing her hesitation, began making distress calls from above, their plaintive cries echoing in the night air. "She's afraid," Willow observed, kneeling at the top of the opening. "She needs encouragement." Before anyone could stop her, the girl began descending the ramp, moving slowly and speaking softly to the bear. "Willow," Emma cried out in alarm. "It's okay, Mom," Willow said without taking her eyes off Aspen. "She trusts me." The adults watched in tense silence as the child approached the massive predator in the narrow confines of the root cellar. Aspen growled softly, clearly uncertain about the strange wooden slope and the confusing smells of fear and determination emanating from the humans. Willow stopped a few feet from the bear, then did something that made the adults gasp. She sat down on the ramp, making herself small and unthreatening, and simply waited. "What is she doing?" Lewis whispered, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered gun. "The right thing?" Catherine replied quietly. "Watch." For a long, breathless moment, child and bear regarded each other in the dim light of the cellar. Then, with deliberate slowness, Willow turned and began crawling up the ramp, glancing back once to see if Aspen would follow. To everyone's amazement, the bear did just that, placing one massive paw on the bottom of the ramp, then another, testing its strength before committing her full weight. The wood creaked ominously but held as Aspen began her awkward ascent, following Willow like an oversized, dangerous puppy. When they emerged into the moonlit clearing, Willow immediately moved aside, allowing Aspen to reunite with her cubs, who swarmed over their mother with evident relief, sniffing at her wounds and making soft chirping sounds. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," Lewis said, helping Mason dismantle the ramp now that it had served its purpose. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Mason replied, watching his daughter with a mixture of terror and pride. Catherine approached Willow, kneeling to meet the girl at eye level. "You understood something about Aspen that most adults never would," she said seriously. "You saw her fear and knew how to address it, not with force or demands, but with trust and patience. That's a rare gift." Willow beamed under the praise, though her teeth had begun to chatter in the cold. Can we go to the cabin now? I'm freezing." The hunting cabin proved to be in better condition than its exterior suggested. Though small, essentially one room with a rudimentary fireplace, it was dry and, most importantly, intact. Lewis quickly got a fire going using the stacked firewood, and soon the space was filled with blessed warmth. A more thorough exploration revealed basic supplies: some ancient canned goods, musty but usable blankets, a few pieces of primitive furniture, and, most valuable of all, a battery-powered emergency radio. "Let's see if we can reach anyone," Lewis said, setting up the radio on a rough wooden table. "The storm's passed, so we might get a signal out." As Lewis worked with the radio, Emma examined Aspen's wounds by firelight. "The stitches are holding," she reported with relief, "and there's no sign of renewed bleeding. Catherine, you do good work." The older woman nodded acknowledgement from where she sat with the cubs, who had curled up together in front of the fire and fallen into exhausted sleep. Wild animals are remarkably resilient when given proper care and the chance to heal naturally. Harding sat apart from the others, his handcuffed wrists resting in his lap, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. He had said little since their escape from the collapsing tunnel, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. Mason found himself studying the deputy, wondering at the choices that had led a law enforcement officer to become a poacher, and then a would-be murderer to cover his crimes. What twist in the man's life path had brought him to this point? As if sensing Mason's scrutiny, Harding looked up. "What?" "I was just wondering why," Mason said simply. "Why risk everything to hunt illegally? Why shoot a mother bear with cubs? You knew it was wrong on every level." Harding's jaw tightened, but then, unexpectedly, his shoulders slumped. "My father," he said, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "He hunted these mountains for 40 years, had the biggest collection of trophies in the county, Bear, elk, mountain lion, you name it. He stared into the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. When he died last year, I found out he'd never shot a female bear with cubs. Said it was the one trophy a real hunter would never take, because it crossed a line. Proved nothing about your skill and everything about your lack of character. Harding laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. So, of course, that's exactly what I set out to do. Show I could do what even the great Robert Harding wouldn't. That's a hell of a way to process grief, Lewis commented, looking up from the radio. Wasn't grief, Harding corrected flatly. It was hate. I hated him, hated living in his shadow, hated the way everyone in this country compared me to him. Your daddy would have handled this different, they'd say, or you're not half the man your father was. His voice twisted with bitterness. I wanted to do the one thing that would have horrified him most. And how did that work out for you? Catherine asked, her tone neither judgmental nor sympathetic, simply curious. Harding looked at the handcuffs on his wrists, then at the Bear family by the fire. Not like I expected, he admitted. We've got contact, Lewis announced suddenly, adjusting the radio's frequency. County Emergency Services is receiving us. They're sending a rescue team at first light, about 3 hours from now. A collective sigh of relief went through the group. They would be rescued. They would survive this extraordinary night. What happens to Aspen and her cubs now? Noah asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. Catherine smiled at the boy. As soon as the rescue team arrives, I'll arrange transport to my sanctuary. Aspen will need several weeks of recovery time, but eventually she and her cubs will return to the wild, though perhaps to a different part of the forest, further from human habitation. Will we ever see them again? Willow asked, a hint of sadness in her voice. That depends, Catherine replied thoughtfully, on whether they want to be seen. Bears have excellent memories, as I mentioned. Aspen might avoid humans entirely after this experience, which would be the safest outcome for her. Or ... Or what? Mason prompted when she trailed off. Catherine's weathered face softened into a gentle smile. Or she might remember the humans who helped her when she needed it most. She might keep her distance, but watch from afar. Some of the bears I've rehabilitated over the years have been known to observe me from the forest edge when I work on the sanctuary boundaries. Never approaching, but acknowledging in their way. The thought seemed to comfort the children, who had clearly formed an attachment to the bears despite the brevity of their encounter. As the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Mason found himself reflecting on the events of the past 12 hours. What had begun as a simple family retreat had transformed into something extraordinary, a convergence of humans and wildlife, of danger and compassion, of the worst and best of human nature. Lewis had securely handcuffed Harding to a sturdy roof beam, ensuring he couldn't escape before the rescue team arrived. The deputy seemed resigned to his fate now, the fight gone out of him as the reality of his actions and their consequences settled in. Emma joined Mason by the cabin's small window, slipping her hand into his as they watched the sunrise beginning to gild the snow-covered landscape. "Do you think the main cabin survived?" she asked, quietly. Mason squeezed her hand. "It doesn't matter," he said, surprising himself with the truth of the words. "We all survived. Everything else can be rebuilt." The peaceful moment was interrupted by a soft moan from Aspen. The bear was stirring, her massive body shifting as the sedative wore off completely and awareness returned. The adults tensed, uncertain how the fully conscious animal would react to finding herself in such close quarters with humans. Aspen raised her head, blinking slowly as she took in her surroundings. Her dark eyes moved from person to person, lingering on Catherine, then Emma, and finally settling on the children who sat nearby, watching her with undisguised fascination. For a heart-stopping moment, no one moved or breathed. The bear's behavior now would reveal whether their extraordinary connection had been real or merely a product of desperation and sedation. Aspen sniffed the air, her sensitive nose cataloging the many human scents around her. Then, to everyone's amazement, she simply laid her head back down, positioning herself so that her body continued to shield her sleeping cubs, but making no aggressive moves toward the humans sharing her space. "She knows," Willow whispered, her face alight with wonder. "She remembers that we helped her." "I think she does," Catherine agreed softly. "In her own way, she's acknowledging a debt." "We're even," Mason said, thinking of how Aspen had protected Willow from Harding's bullet, how the bear had chosen mercy over vengeance when she could have easily killed the deputy. "If anything, we're the ones who owe her." The sound of approaching helicopters reached them then, growing steadily louder as rescue approached. Soon this strange interlude would end, and they would return to the normal world. Changed, perhaps, but outwardly the same. "What will you tell people?" Harding asked suddenly, looking at Mason. "About all this? About me?" Mason considered the question. The story was almost too incredible to believe. A mother bear seeking human help, the surgery by firelight, the escape through ancient tunnels, a child leading a bear to safety. Who would accept such a tale? The truth, he decided, every extraordinary detail of it. Some will believe, some won't. But it happened, and that's what matters. As the helicopter sounds grew closer, Aspen became restless, clearly disturbed by the unfamiliar noise. She rose to her feet, gathering her cubs with gentle nudges of her massive head. "She wants to leave before the rescue team arrives," Catherine observed. "A wise decision." "Can she travel in her condition?" Emma asked with concern. "To find a safe hiding place, yes," Catherine replied. "I'll track her once you're all safely evacuated. Guide her toward the sanctuary." Mason moved to the cabin door and opened it, letting in a rush of cold, clean air. "Thank you," he said simply to the bear, stepping aside to clear a path for her exit. Whether responding to his words or merely taking advantage of the escape route, Aspen moved toward the open door, her cubs scrambling along beside her. At the threshold, the massive bear paused, turning her head to look back at the gathered humans one last time. In that moment, Mason felt something pass between them, an understanding that transcended the barriers of species and language. Not friendship exactly, for Aspen was and would always be wild, but a recognition, perhaps, that the boundaries between human and animal were more permeable than either had imagined. Then Aspen was gone, disappearing into the forest with her cubs just as the first helicopter appeared over the treetops, its searchlight cutting through the last shadows of night. 3 months later, spring had transformed the mountainside, erasing all visible traces of the winter storm. The forest hummed with new life, birds building nests, deer grazing on fresh grass, wildflowers dotting the forest floor with splashes of color. Nature, as it always did, had renewed itself. The Morgan cabin had not survived the collapse. When rescue teams helped them return to the site days after the storm, they found only splintered timbers and crushed walls, the weight of the fallen pine having demolished the structure almost completely. Yet miraculously, Mason's camera equipment had survived in its waterproof cases, including the memory cards containing the photographs he'd taken during the storm, including several blurry but unmistakable images of Aspen at their door, pleading for help. Those photographs, along with testimony from Ranger Lewis and Catherine Blackwood, had been instrumental in the case against Deputy Harding. He had ultimately pleaded guilty to illegal hunting and reckless endangerment, avoiding the more serious attempted murder charges in exchange for his cooperation in an ongoing investigation into organized poaching rings operating in the national forest. The story of the bear who sought human help had spread, first locally, then nationally, capturing imaginations and sparking debates about animal intelligence and the relationship between humans and wildlife. Mason had been approached by several publishing companies interested in a book about the experience. He was considering the offers. Today, however, was not about the past, but the future. The Morgan family stood on the site of their former cabin, now cleared and prepared for rebuilding. The new design included several significant changes, most notably reinforced roof structures capable of withstanding even the heaviest snow loads, and large windows facing the forest to provide better visibility of approaching wildlife. "Are you sure you want to rebuild here?" Emma's mother had asked when they announced their decision. "After everything that happened?" The question had given Mason pause, but only briefly. This place, this mountain, had become more than just a vacation property to them now. It was where their family had faced death together and emerged stronger, where they had witnessed something remarkable and rare. "We're sure," Emma had answered for both of them. "It's part of us now." As the contractor walked them through the latest plans, pointing out features and asking for approvals, Willow wandered to the edge of the clearing, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. The forest was different in spring, louder, more vibrant, full of movement and life that the winter had suppressed. She found herself scanning the tree line, searching for something, someone. "Willow," Noah called from across the clearing. "Come see the new fireplace design." She turned to respond, then froze as a flicker of movement caught her eye. Something large shifting in the shadows beneath the pines. Heart suddenly racing, she peered into the dappled darkness between the trees. There, just visible among the new growth, stood a brown bear. Larger than Willow remembered, her winter coat shed for a sleeker summer one, the scars on her flank and shoulder barely visible now. Beside her, two half-grown cubs explored a fallen log, their movements more confident and coordinated than the helpless babies they had been during the storm. Aspen. The bear's dark eyes met Willow's across the clearing, a gaze not of fear or aggression, but of quiet acknowledgement. Recognition. Willow didn't call out or draw attention. Some connections were too profound, too personal to share, even with family. Instead, she simply raised her hand in a small wave, a silent hello between old friends who had once shared an extraordinary night of trust and survival. Aspen watched for a moment longer, her expression unreadable in the human sense, yet somehow conveying a message nonetheless. Then, with a soft chuff to her cubs, she turned and melted back into the forest, leaving no trace of her presence except a slight swaying of ferns and the memory of her eyes. Willow smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. She had hoped, but not truly expected, to see the bear family again. Catherine had warned them that truly wild animals rarely sought human contact unless desperate, and Aspen, fully recovered and with growing cubs to protect, had no reason to approach humans again. Yet she had come, not for help this time, but perhaps to confirm a memory, to close a circle. "Willow!" Noah called again, more insistently. "Coming," she replied, turning away from the forest edge. But as she rejoined her family, Willow carried with her a secret knowledge that would shape her understanding of the world forever. That the boundaries between human and animal were not walls but bridges, waiting for the courage to cross them. In the forest beyond, Aspen led her cubs deeper into the wilderness, away from the human clearing and its strange structures. The female cub, the one the human children had called Willow Jr., paused to look back, perhaps sensing her mother's momentary connection to the past. Aspen nudged her forward with gentle insistence. They were wild, and the wild was where they belonged.